Question 1. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a licensed firearm owner in Prague has just experienced a home invasion where they felt their life was in imminent danger, and they briefly brandished their legally registered handgun. The intruder fled before any physical confrontation occurred. What is the most appropriate and legally compliant course of action for the firearm owner to take immediately following the departure of the intruder? Option A. Conceal the firearm and the incident from authorities to avoid potential complications with their firearm license. Option B. Dispose of the firearm in a remote location to eliminate any evidence of its involvement. Option C. Secure the firearm in a legally compliant manner and immediately report the incident, including the brandishing of the firearm, to the Czech police. Option D. Immediately use the firearm to pursue and apprehend the intruder to prevent them from escaping. Correct answer is C. Secure the firearm in a legally compliant manner and immediately report the incident, including the brandishing of the firearm, to the Czech police. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an individual to balance the immediate need for self-defense with the strict legal requirements for firearm possession and use in the Czech Republic. Misinterpreting or disregarding these regulations can lead to severe legal consequences, including criminal charges and the permanent loss of the right to own firearms. The individual's emotional state, while understandable, cannot override legal obligations. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves immediately securing the firearm in a legally compliant manner and then reporting the incident to the relevant authorities. This approach prioritizes adherence to the Firearms Act, Zákon o zbraních a střelivu, and its implementing regulations. Specifically, Section 16 of the Act outlines the conditions for carrying firearms, which generally require a permit and adherence to specific safety protocols. While self-defense is a recognized right, the use of a firearm in such a situation must be proportionate and justifiable under Czech law, and any incident involving a firearm must be reported. Securing the weapon prevents further unauthorized access and potential misuse, while reporting ensures transparency and allows for a proper legal investigation. This aligns with the ethical obligation to act responsibly and lawfully when dealing with potentially dangerous items. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately using the firearm for self-defense without first ensuring its secure storage and without considering the legal ramifications of its presence and potential use outside of a declared emergency. This disregards the fundamental principle that firearm possession and use are strictly regulated, and any action taken must be within the bounds of the law, including reporting requirements. The law does not grant a blanket right to use a firearm in any perceived threat without subsequent legal scrutiny and adherence to reporting protocols. Another incorrect approach is to conceal the incident and the firearm, hoping it will not be discovered. This is a direct violation of reporting obligations under Czech law, which mandates reporting of firearm-related incidents, especially those involving potential threats or use. Such concealment constitutes obstruction of justice and demonstrates a severe lack of professional integrity and disregard for public safety. A further incorrect approach is to immediately dispose of the firearm without reporting the incident. This action not only violates reporting requirements but also actively attempts to destroy evidence, which is a serious criminal offense. It demonstrates a complete disregard for the legal framework governing firearms and the administration of justice. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such a situation should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance, public safety, and ethical conduct. This involves 1. Immediate assessment of the immediate threat to personal safety. 2. If a threat is present and immediate, taking proportionate defensive action as permitted by law. 3. Regardless of whether defensive action was taken, immediately securing the firearm in a manner compliant with the Czech Firearms Act, e.g., unloaded in a locked case separate from ammunition. 4. Promptly reporting the incident and the presence of the firearm to the relevant police authorities. 5. Cooperating fully with any investigation. This structured approach ensures that immediate safety concerns are addressed while simultaneously upholding legal obligations and ethical responsibilities. Question 2. Benchmark analysis indicates that during the practical component of the Zkouška odborné způsobilosti in the Czech Republic, an applicant is presented with a firearm and instructed to prepare it for firing. The applicant has prior experience with similar firearms, but is unsure if the specific model provided has any unique safety mechanisms or operational differences. What is the most appropriate course of action for the applicant to demonstrate their proficiency and adherence to examination standards? Option A. Attempt to quickly research the firearm model on their mobile device to understand its specific features before handling it. Option B. Immediately proceed with the standard safe handling and loading procedures they are familiar with, assuming the firearm operates similarly to others they have handled. Option C. Begin the process, but verbally express any uncertainties or potential issues they encounter to the examiner as they arise. Option D. Pause and politely request the examiner to confirm the specific safety mechanisms and operational procedures for the firearm model being used before proceeding. The correct answer is D. Pause and politely request the examiner to confirm the specific safety mechanisms and operational procedures for the firearm model being used before proceeding. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the applicant to demonstrate not only theoretical knowledge of firearm safety and handling, but also the practical application of these principles in a controlled environment. The pressure of an examination setting, coupled with the inherent risks associated with firearms, necessitates a calm, methodical, and rule-abiding approach. Failure to adhere strictly to the examiner's instructions or establish safety protocols can have severe consequences, including immediate disqualification and potential safety hazards. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves meticulously following all instructions provided by the certified examiner, including those regarding the safe handling, loading, unloading, and firing of the firearm. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the core objectives of the Czech Republic's Zkouška, odborné způsobilosti, which are to ensure that applicants possess the necessary skills and knowledge to handle firearms safely and responsibly, as mandated by Czech law concerning firearms and ammunition, Zákon o zbraních a střelivu. Adherence to the examiner's directives is paramount to demonstrating proficiency and compliance with the examination's strict safety standards. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves assuming familiarity with the firearm and proceeding with handling without explicit confirmation from the examiner. This is a significant regulatory and ethical failure because it bypasses a critical safety check and demonstrates a lack of respect for the examination process and the examiner's authority. It suggests a potential for unsafe practices in real-world scenarios, which is precisely what the examination aims to prevent. Another incorrect approach is to attempt to correct the examiner's instructions or question their validity during the practical exercise. This demonstrates a lack of discipline and an inability to follow directions, which are fundamental requirements for firearm ownership and handling under Czech law. Such behavior indicates a potential for insubordination and a disregard for established procedures, posing a risk to oneself and others. A further incorrect approach is to rush through the practical steps to complete the exercise quickly. This haste can lead to errors in safe handling, loading, or unloading, increasing the risk of an accidental discharge or other safety incident. It shows a lack of the careful, deliberate approach required for safe firearm management, which is a cornerstone of the Zkouška odborné způsobilosti. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing similar situations should adopt a mindset of disciplined adherence to established protocols. The decision-making process should prioritize safety above all else, followed by strict compliance with procedural guidelines. When in doubt, it is always best to seek clarification from the authority figure, in this case, the examiner, rather than making assumptions or improvising. This systematic approach ensures that all actions are deliberate, safe, and in accordance with legal and ethical requirements. Question. Benchmark analysis indicates that during the practical component of the Zkouška odborné způsobilosti in the Czech Republic, an applicant is presented with a firearm and instructed to prepare it for firing. The applicant has prior experience with similar firearms, but is unsure if the specific model provided has any unique safety mechanisms or operational differences. What is the most appropriate course of action for the applicant to demonstrate their proficiency and adherence to examination standards? Options. A. Immediately proceed with the standard safe handling and loading procedures they are familiar with, assuming the firearm operates similarly to others they have handled. B. Pause and politely request the examiner to confirm the specific safety mechanisms and operational procedures for the firearm model being used before proceeding. C. Attempt to quickly research the firearm model on their mobile device to understand its specific features before handling it. D. Begin the process, but verbally express any uncertainties or potential issues they encounter to the examiner as they arise. Question 3. Benchmark analysis indicates that during the practical shooting portion of the Zkouška odborné způsobilosti in the Czech Republic, an applicant becomes visibly anxious when transitioning between firing positions. Despite being instructed to keep their finger off the trigger and maintain a safe muzzle direction, the applicant's hand trembles, and their finger occasionally drifts towards the trigger guard as they move. What is the most appropriate course of action for the examiner to ensure the integrity of the examination and uphold safety standards? Option A. Allow the applicant to continue the exercise, but make a note of the trembling and finger movement, assuming it is nervousness and not a deliberate disregard for safety. Option B. Suggest the applicant take a short break to compose themselves before continuing the exercise, emphasizing that composure is a key aspect of safe firearm handling. Option C. Immediately halt the examination, instruct the applicant to secure the firearm in a safe manner, and explain that their demonstrated lack of control and potential for unsafe handling necessitates a failure of the practical component. Option D. Verbally remind the applicant to keep their finger off the trigger and maintain a safe muzzle direction, and if the behavior persists, then consider failing them. The correct answer is C. Immediately halt the examination, instruct the applicant to secure the firearm in a safe manner, and explain that their demonstrated lack of control and potential for unsafe handling necessitates a failure of the practical component. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the applicant to demonstrate not only theoretical knowledge of firearm safety and handling, but also the practical application of these principles under potentially stressful conditions. The core challenge lies in balancing the strict adherence to safety protocols with the need to effectively and safely complete the required shooting exercises, all while under the observation of an examiner. Misjudging the situation or deviating from established procedures can have severe consequences, including failure of the exam and potential safety risks. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves meticulously following all instructions provided by the examiner, maintaining constant situational awareness, and prioritizing safety above all else. This means ensuring the firearm is always handled in a safe direction, the finger is kept off the trigger until ready to fire, and all safety mechanisms are engaged when not actively shooting. The applicant must demonstrate a thorough understanding of the firearm's operation and the range rules, applying them consistently throughout the examination. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the fundamental principles of firearm safety and the explicit requirements of the Czech Republic's Zkouška odborné způsobilosti, which emphasizes safe handling and proficiency as paramount. Adherence to these standards ensures the applicant is fit to possess a firearm. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to become overly focused on achieving a high score or demonstrating speed, leading to a rushed execution of the shooting exercises. This can result in overlooking crucial safety checks, such as ensuring the firearm is unloaded when moving between firing positions or failing to maintain a safe muzzle direction. This approach fails to meet the core safety requirements of the exam and demonstrates a lack of discipline and respect for the inherent dangers of firearms. Another incorrect approach is to hesitate excessively or appear uncertain about the procedures, even when instructed. While caution is important, prolonged indecision can be interpreted as a lack of proficiency and confidence in handling the firearm safely. This can stem from a misunderstanding of the syllabus or a lack of practical preparation, both of which are grounds for failing the Zkouška odborné způsobilosti. A third incorrect approach is to attempt to shortcut safety procedures, perhaps by assuming the examiner will correct any minor lapses or by believing certain steps are unnecessary for a proficient shooter. This demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of the exam's purpose, which is to verify adherence to strict safety protocols, not just shooting accuracy. Such an approach is a direct violation of the safety regulations and ethical responsibilities associated with firearm ownership. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing similar situations should employ a structured decision-making process. First, thoroughly review and understand all examination requirements and safety protocols beforehand. During the exam, Maintain a calm and focused demeanor, prioritizing safety checks and procedural adherence over speed or score. If unsure about any instruction, politely ask for clarification from the examiner. Continuously assess the environment and the firearm status. This systematic approach ensures compliance with regulations and demonstrates the necessary competence and responsibility for safe firearm handling. Question 4. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of a firearm discharge incident due to improper handling during a supervised training session in the Czech Republic. As an instructor, what is the most appropriate immediate course of action to ensure both safety and compliance with the Zkouška odborné způsobilosti requirements? Option A. Pause the session. Provide immediate corrective instruction on the specific handling error. Conduct a brief redemonstration, and then review safety protocols with all participants. Option B. Immediately terminate the training session and disqualify the individual from the proficiency examination due to the observed safety lapse. Option C. Continue the training session, assuming the individual will self-correct, and document the observed error for future reference. Option D. Note the handling error in the individual's training log, but proceed with the session without further immediate intervention. Correct answer is A. Pause the session. Provide immediate corrective instruction on the specific handling error, conduct a brief redemonstration, and then review safety protocols with all participants. Explanation. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of a firearm discharge incident due to improper handling during a supervised training session. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the need for practical firearms training, which is essential for demonstrating proficiency under the Czech Republic's Act on Firearms and Ammunition, Zákon o zbraních a střelivu, with the paramount importance of safety and adherence to established protocols. A lapse in judgment could lead to injury, legal repercussions, and damage to the reputation of the training provider and the individual seeking certification. Careful judgment is required to identify the most effective and compliant method for addressing the identified risk. The best approach involves immediate intervention and a thorough review of the training process. This entails pausing the training session to address the specific handling error observed, providing immediate corrective instruction to the individual, and then conducting a brief, targeted redemonstration of the correct technique. Following this, a review of the training session's safety protocols with all participants, emphasizing the importance of adherence to the established procedures as mandated by the Czech Ministry of the Interior's decrees concerning firearms training, is crucial. This approach directly mitigates the immediate risk, reinforces learning, and ensures ongoing compliance with safety regulations, thereby upholding the integrity of the proficiency examination process. An incorrect approach would be to ignore the observed handling error and proceed with the training, assuming the individual will correct themselves or that the risk is minimal. This fails to address the immediate safety concern and directly contravenes the spirit and letter of the Act on Firearms and Ammunition, which places a strong emphasis on safe handling and responsible firearm ownership. It also undermines the purpose of the Proficiency exam, which is to certify that an individual can handle a firearm safely and competently. Another incorrect approach would be to immediately disqualify the individual from the examination based on a single observed error without providing an opportunity for correction. While safety is paramount, the Act on Firearms and Ammunition and associated regulations generally allow for corrective instruction during training. Disqualification without this opportunity could be seen as overly punitive and not reflective of a comprehensive assessment of proficiency, especially if the error was minor and easily rectifiable. A further incorrect approach would be to simply document the error in the individual's record without any immediate corrective action or review of training procedures. This approach fails to address the immediate safety risk and does not contribute to the individual's learning or the improvement of the training program. It also neglects the responsibility of the training provider to ensure that candidates demonstrate a sufficient level of safe handling throughout the assessment process. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety, compliance, and effective learning. This involves 1. Immediate risk assessment and mitigation. Identify and address any immediate safety hazards. 2. Regulatory compliance. Ensure all actions align with the Act on Firearms and Ammunition and relevant decrees. 3. Opportunity for correction and learning. Provide constructive feedback and opportunities for individuals to demonstrate understanding and correct errors. 4. Documentation and review. Maintain accurate records and use incidents as opportunities to improve training protocols. Question 5. During a practical firearms handling assessment for the Zkouška odborné způsobilosti in the Czech Republic, an examiner instructs an applicant to perform a specific safety check on a firearm. The applicant, having extensive prior experience, believes a slightly different, more efficient method they are familiar with would achieve the same safety outcome. How should the applicant proceed? Option A. Begin the examiner's instructed safety check, but then switch to their preferred method midway if they feel it is safer. Option B. Implement their own familiar, more efficient safety check method, assuming the examiner will recognize its equivalence. Option C. Perform the safety check exactly as instructed by the examiner, even if a different method is perceived as more efficient. Option D. Ask the examiner to explain the rationale behind their specific instruction before proceeding with the safety check. The correct answer is C. Perform the safety check exactly as instructed by the examiner, even if a different method is perceived as more efficient. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the applicant to demonstrate not only theoretical knowledge of firearm safety and handling, but also the practical application of these principles under potentially stressful or unfamiliar circumstances. The examiner's role is to assess the applicant's judgment, adherence to safety protocols, and overall suitability for firearm ownership, which carries significant public safety implications. Misinterpreting or failing to adhere to the examiner's instructions, even if seemingly minor, can indicate a lack of the required diligence and respect for the process mandated by Czech law for obtaining a firearms license. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves meticulously following the examiner's instructions precisely as given, even if the applicant believes they understand the underlying principle or has a slightly different preferred method. This demonstrates attentiveness, respect for authority, and a commitment to the established safety procedures outlined in the Zkouška odborné způsobilosti regulations. The applicant must prioritize clear communication and confirmation of understanding if any instruction is ambiguous, rather than making assumptions. This aligns with the core principle of ensuring absolute safety and control, which is paramount in the Czech Republic's firearms licensing framework. Incorrect approaches analysis. An approach where the applicant proceeds with a slightly modified technique, believing it to be more efficient or equally safe, is incorrect. This demonstrates a failure to adhere to the specific, controlled environment of the examination, and can be interpreted as a disregard for the examiner's authority and the established safety protocols. Such an action undermines the purpose of the examination, which is to verify compliance with standardized procedures, not individual improvisation. Another incorrect approach is to ask clarifying questions about the examiner's instructions after the task has already begun. This indicates a lack of initial attentiveness and can disrupt the flow of the examination. While clarification is important, it should be sought before commencing an action, not during its execution, as this suggests the applicant was not fully engaged or comprehending the instructions from the outset. Finally, an approach where the applicant assumes the examiner's intent and proceeds with a task based on that assumption, without explicit confirmation, is also incorrect. This highlights a potential for misjudgment and a lack of precise execution, which are critical failures in the context of firearm handling and safety. The Zkouška odborné způsobilosti requires a high degree of precision and adherence to directives. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should adopt a mindset of meticulous compliance and clear communication. The decision-making process should prioritize understanding and executing instructions exactly as given. If any instruction is unclear, the professional should pause and politely request clarification before proceeding. This approach ensures that the applicant demonstrates the required level of discipline, attention to detail, and respect for safety regulations, which are the fundamental pillars of the Czech Republic's firearms proficiency examination. Question 6. Benchmark analysis indicates that a firearms examiner in the Czech Republic, tasked with conducting a mandatory gun proficiency examination, discovers that one of the candidates is a close personal friend with whom they have a long-standing relationship. The examiner is aware of the candidate's general familiarity with firearms, but has not personally observed their proficiency in a formal testing environment. Considering the legal and ethical obligations of examiners in the Czech Republic, what is the most appropriate course of action for the examiner? Option A. Immediately recuse themselves from conducting the examination for this specific candidate and inform the relevant examination authority of the conflict of interest. Option B. Conduct the examination as scheduled, confident that their professional integrity will prevent any personal bias from influencing their judgment. Option C. Delegate the examination of this candidate to a colleague without disclosing the personal relationship to the colleague or the examination authority. Option D. Proceed with the examination, consciously attempting to be more stringent in their assessment to ensure fairness, despite the personal relationship. The correct answer is A. Immediately recuse themselves from conducting the examination for this specific candidate and inform the relevant examination authority of the conflict of interest. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to navigate a situation where a potential conflict of interest could arise, impacting the integrity of the gun proficiency examination process in the Czech Republic. The examiner must uphold the impartiality and fairness of the examination, as mandated by Czech law concerning firearms proficiency, while also managing personal relationships. The core challenge lies in balancing professional duty with personal connections to ensure no undue influence or perception of bias affects the examination outcome. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves recusing oneself from the examination of a close acquaintance. This approach is correct because it directly adheres to the principles of impartiality and objectivity enshrined in the Czech legal framework governing firearms proficiency examinations. Specifically, Section 30 of Act No. 119/2002 Call on Firearms and Ammunition and its implementing regulations emphasize the need for examiners to be objective and impartial. By recusing themselves, the examiner eliminates any potential for perceived or actual bias, thereby safeguarding the integrity of the examination and upholding public trust in the licensing process. This action preempts any situation where personal feelings might influence the assessment of the candidate's proficiency, ensuring that the evaluation is based solely on the candidate's demonstrated skills and knowledge as required by the examination syllabus. Incorrect approach is analysis. An approach where the examiner proceeds with the examination but attempts to be extra strict to compensate for the personal relationship is professionally unacceptable. This is because it still involves a direct conflict of interest and introduces an element of subjective judgment based on an attempt to overcorrect for bias, rather than pure objectivity. The examiner's actions, even with good intentions, are still influenced by the personal connection, potentially leading to an unfair assessment, either by being overly critical or, conversely, inadvertently lenient due to subconscious bias. This violates the requirement for impartial assessment. Another unacceptable approach is to conduct the examination as usual, believing that the personal relationship will not influence their professional judgment. This demonstrates a failure to recognize the inherent risks of a conflict of interest and the potential for subconscious bias. Czech regulations require examiners to actively avoid situations that could compromise their impartiality. Relying solely on self-assurance without taking concrete steps to mitigate the conflict, such as recusal, is a regulatory and ethical failure. Finally, an approach where the examiner delegates the examination to a colleague without formally declaring the conflict of interest is also professionally unsound. While delegation can be a valid way to manage conflicts, failing to disclose the relationship to the colleague and the relevant authorities means the colleague is not fully aware of the context, and the process lacks transparency. This can lead to a breakdown in the chain of accountability and potentially undermine the integrity of the examination if the colleague is unaware of the need for heightened vigilance regarding potential bias. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such situations should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes transparency, impartiality, and adherence to regulatory requirements. This involves 1. Identifying potential conflicts of interest by proactively considering all personal relationships that might intersect with professional duties. 2. Consulting relevant regulations and ethical guidelines to understand the specific requirements for handling such conflicts. 3. Taking decisive action to mitigate or eliminate the conflict, with recusal being the preferred option when direct involvement is compromised. 4. Documenting all actions taken and decisions made, especially when conflicts are declared or managed. 5. Seeking guidance from supervisors or regulatory bodies if unsure about the appropriate course of action. The paramount principle is to always ensure the integrity and fairness of the professional process. Question 7. When applying for a firearms license in the Czech Republic, what is the most prudent course of action regarding a minor, non-violent misdemeanor conviction from 5 years ago that is no longer officially recorded, but was related to a public order disturbance? Option A. Emphasize that the misdemeanor was not related to violence or firearms, and therefore has no bearing on the applicant's suitability for a firearms license. Option B. Assume the misdemeanor conviction is irrelevant as it is no longer officially recorded and therefore does not need to be disclosed. Option C. Only disclose the misdemeanor conviction if specifically asked about it during the application process, and then only provide minimal details. Option D. Proactively disclose the misdemeanor conviction to the issuing authority, providing a brief explanation of the circumstances and demonstrating its resolution. The correct answer is D. Proactively disclose the misdemeanor conviction to the issuing authority, providing a brief explanation of the circumstances and demonstrating its resolution. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an applicant seeking a firearms license in the Czech Republic. The core difficulty lies in accurately assessing and demonstrating the required level of proficiency and responsibility, particularly when faced with a past minor infraction that, while not directly related to firearms, could be interpreted by authorities as indicative of a lack of judgment or reliability. The applicant must navigate the legal requirements for demonstrating good character and the absence of disqualifying factors, as outlined in the Czech Firearms Act. Zákon o zbraních a střelivu. Careful judgment is required to present a complete and truthful picture to the authorities, ensuring all relevant information is disclosed appropriately. Correct approach involves a proactive and transparent disclosure of the past incident to the relevant authorities during the application process. This demonstrates honesty and a willingness to be forthcoming, which are crucial elements of demonstrating good character and trustworthiness as required by the Czech Firearms Act. By providing context and demonstrating that the incident was minor and has been resolved without further issues, the applicant can mitigate potential concerns. This approach aligns with the spirit of the law, which aims to ensure that firearms are entrusted only to responsible individuals. The authorities will then be able to make an informed decision based on all available information, including the applicant's explanation. An incorrect approach would be to omit any mention of the past incident, hoping it goes unnoticed. This failure to disclose relevant information constitutes a breach of honesty and can be interpreted as an attempt to mislead the authorities. Such an omission could lead to the application being rejected or, if discovered later, the revocation of any granted license, as it undermines the fundamental requirement of good character. Another incorrect approach would be to downplay the significance of the incident to the point of misrepresentation. While context is important, deliberately minimizing a past event to the extent that it misleads the authorities is ethically unsound and legally problematic, as it still involves a lack of full transparency. Finally, an approach that involves providing fabricated or misleading documentation to obscure the incident would be a severe violation of the law and ethical principles, leading to immediate disqualification and potential legal repercussions. Professionals in this situation should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes honesty, transparency, and full compliance with the Czech Firearms Act. This involves thoroughly understanding the application requirements, including any obligations to disclose past events, even if they seem minor. Applicants should gather all relevant documentation and be prepared to provide a clear and factual account of any past incidents, along with evidence of their resolution. Consulting with legal counsel specializing in firearms law in the Czech Republic can also be beneficial to ensure all aspects of the application are handled correctly and in accordance with the law. Question. When applying for a firearms license in the Czech Republic, what is the most prudent course of action regarding a minor, non-violent misdemeanor conviction from 5 years ago that is no longer officially recorded, but was related to a public order disturbance? Options. A. Proactively disclose the misdemeanor conviction to the issuing authority, providing a brief explanation of the circumstances and demonstrating its resolution. B. Assume the misdemeanor conviction is irrelevant as it is no longer officially recorded and therefore does not need to be disclosed. C. Only disclose the misdemeanor conviction if specifically asked about it during the application process, and then only provide minimal details. D. Emphasize that the misdemeanor was not related to violence or firearms, and therefore has no bearing on the applicant's suitability for a firearms license. Question 8. Compliance review shows that during a firearms proficiency exam in the Czech Republic, an applicant, citing extensive prior experience, insists on skipping several mandatory practical shooting exercises, claiming they are unnecessary for someone of their skill level. As the certified instructor, what is the most appropriate course of action to ensure compliance with Czech regulations? Option A. Immediately terminate the examination and inform the applicant they have failed due to non-compliance with the instructor's instructions. Option B. Firmly but politely explain that all mandatory practical exercises must be completed as per the Zkouška odborné způsobilosti requirements, regardless of perceived prior experience, and proceed with the full examination. Option C. Allow the applicant to bypass the specified practical exercises, noting their claims of experience in the examination report. Option D. Subjectively assess the applicant's proficiency in the skipped exercises based on their verbal assurances and prior experience claims. The correct answer is B. Firmly but politely explain that all mandatory practical exercises must be completed as per the Zkouška odborné způsobilosti requirements, regardless of perceived prior experience, and proceed with the full examination. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a firearms instructor in the Czech Republic. The challenge lies in balancing the applicant's perceived confidence and eagerness with the absolute requirement of demonstrating proficiency, as mandated by Czech law for obtaining a firearms license. The instructor must avoid subjective assessments and adhere strictly to the established evaluation criteria, ensuring public safety and legal compliance. The applicant's insistence on skipping certain practical exercises due to their belief in their existing skill level creates a conflict between client satisfaction and regulatory adherence. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a firm but respectful adherence to the prescribed curriculum and evaluation standards of the Czech Firearms Proficiency Exam, Zkouška odborné způsobilosti. This approach requires the instructor to explain to the applicant that regardless of their self-assessed skill level, all mandatory components of the examination must be completed. This is correct because Section 16 of Act No. 119/2002 Call on Firearms and Ammunition, as amended, explicitly outlines the requirements for demonstrating proficiency, which includes practical exercises designed to assess a range of skills under controlled conditions. The instructor's duty is to ensure the applicant meets these legal standards, not to deviate based on the applicant's personal assurances. This upholds the integrity of the licensing process and the safety of the public. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves allowing the applicant to bypass certain practical exercises based on their claims of prior experience. This is professionally unacceptable because it directly violates the legal mandate for a comprehensive assessment of proficiency as defined by Czech law. It undermines the purpose of the examination, which is to objectively verify an individual's ability to safely handle and use firearms. This approach prioritizes client convenience over legal compliance and public safety, potentially leading to the licensing of individuals who have not demonstrated all the necessary competencies. Another incorrect approach is to proceed with the examination, but to subjectively grade the skipped exercises based on the applicant's verbal assurances. This is also professionally unacceptable, as it introduces bias and subjectivity into a process that must be objective and verifiable. The law requires demonstrable proficiency through practical performance, not through an instructor's subjective interpretation of an applicant's statements. This approach fails to meet the evidentiary requirements for licensing and could lead to legal challenges and a compromised licensing system. A third incorrect approach would be to immediately fail the applicant without a clear explanation of the mandatory components they are refusing to complete. While failure to complete the exam is a likely outcome, the instructor has a professional obligation to first clearly communicate the requirements and the consequences of non-compliance. Simply failing them without this explanation could be seen as unprofessional and could lead to disputes. The instructor should first attempt to educate the applicant on the necessity of the full examination before resorting to failure. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field must adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and public safety above all else. This involves understanding the specific regulatory requirements of the Zkouška odborné způsobilosti in the Czech Republic. When faced with a client who wishes to deviate from these requirements, The professional's first step should be to clearly and respectfully explain the legal obligations and the rationale behind the mandatory components of the examination. If the client remains unwilling to comply, the professional must then follow the established procedures for exam completion or non-completion, ensuring all actions are documented and justifiable under Czech law. The focus should always be on objective assessment and adherence to the prescribed standards. Question 9. The evaluation methodology shows that during a routine inspection of your secured firearm storage in your residence in the Czech Republic, you discover that your young child, who is under the age of 15, has managed to access the area where a legally owned firearm is kept, and you suspect they may have briefly handled it. What is the most appropriate and legally compliant course of action? Option A. Ask other gun owners in your community for their opinions on how to handle such situations before taking any action. Option B. Immediately secure the firearm in a more robust, inaccessible location, document the incident, and consult the Firearms Act, CCWExam and relevant decrees to ensure full compliance with safe storage regulations and reporting obligations. Option C. Only secure the firearm after the child has left the immediate vicinity, and then consider whether to mention the incident to anyone. Option D. Assume the child's curiosity was harmless and that no real danger was present. Then simply ensure the firearm is properly stored for the future. The correct answer is B. Immediately secure the firearm in a more robust, inaccessible location, document the incident, and consult the Firearms Act, CCWExam and relevant decrees to ensure full compliance with safe storage regulations and reporting obligations. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows that proficiency in handling firearms and understanding relevant legislation are paramount for responsible gun ownership in the Czech Republic. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to not only demonstrate practical firearm handling skills, but also to apply legal knowledge in a situation where a minor's access to a firearm is a concern. The core of the challenge lies in balancing the legal responsibilities of a firearm owner with the safety and well-being of a child. The best approach involves a proactive and legally compliant response that prioritizes safety. This means immediately securing the firearm in a manner that prevents unauthorized access, particularly by minors, and then consulting the relevant legal provisions regarding safe storage and the prohibition of minors handling firearms. This approach directly addresses the immediate safety risk and demonstrates a thorough understanding of the legal obligations under Czech law, specifically the Firearms Act, CCWExam. This aligns with the ethical imperative to prevent harm and uphold the law. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the incident as a minor oversight or to assume the child's understanding of firearm safety is sufficient. This fails to acknowledge the strict legal requirements for firearm storage and the inherent risks associated with unsupervised access by minors. Such an approach could lead to a violation of the Firearms Act, potentially resulting in penalties and jeopardizing the individual's firearm license. It also demonstrates a disregard for the ethical responsibility to protect vulnerable individuals. Another incorrect approach would be to only secure the firearm after the child has already handled it, without further action or consultation of legal requirements. Securing the firearm is a necessary step. Failing to investigate the circumstances, understand the legal implications of the child's access, and implement preventative measures based on legal guidance is insufficient. This approach is reactive rather than preventative and does not demonstrate a comprehensive understanding of the responsibilities of a firearm owner. A further incorrect approach would be to rely on informal advice from other gun owners rather than consulting the official legal framework. While peer advice can sometimes be helpful, legal matters concerning firearms are strictly regulated. Relying on informal opinions can lead to misinterpretations of the law and non-compliance, which carries significant consequences under Czech legislation. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a clear hierarchy of actions: immediate safety mitigation, followed by a thorough understanding of legal obligations, and then the implementation of preventative measures. This involves consulting the official Firearms Act and related regulations, understanding the specific requirements for safe storage, and recognizing the absolute prohibition of minors handling firearms without direct, qualified supervision. Ethical considerations regarding the protection of minors must always be integrated into this legal framework. Question 10. The audit findings indicate that a firearms training provider in the Czech Republic is preparing to conduct a pistol proficiency exam for 20 participants. The relevant implementing decree for the Czech Firearms Act specifies a minimum of 50 rounds of ammunition per participant for this type of pistol proficiency assessment. If the provider purchased 950 rounds of ammunition for the event, what is the percentage shortfall of the required ammunition? Option A. The shortfall is 5%, calculated as /frac 1000 text rounds 950 text rounds 950 text rounds times 100 %. Option B. The shortfall is 5%, calculated as /frac 1000 text rounds 950 text rounds 1000 text rounds times 100 %. Option C. The shortfall is 10%, calculated as /frac 1000 text rounds 950 text rounds 1000 text rounds times 100 %. Option D. The shortfall is 76%, calculated as /frac 1000 text rounds 950 text rounds 1000 text rounds times 100 %. The correct answer is B. The shortfall is 5%, calculated as /frac 1000 text rounds 950 text rounds 1000 text rounds times 100 %. Explanation. The audit findings indicate a potential discrepancy in the calculation of the required ammunition for a firearms training course in the Czech Republic, specifically concerning the minimum number of rounds per participant for a specific firearm type. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires not only a precise understanding of the Czech Firearms Act, Zákon o zbraních a střelivu, and its implementing regulations regarding training requirements, but also the ability to perform accurate mathematical calculations based on those regulations. Failure to adhere to the minimum ammunition requirements can lead to non-compliance, potentially invalidating the training and affecting the participants' ability to obtain or retain their firearms license. The correct approach involves a meticulous review of the relevant provisions of the Czech Firearms Act and its implementing decrees, specifically focusing on the minimum ammunition quantities stipulated for the firearm type in question during a proficiency exam. This requires identifying the exact number of rounds mandated per participant for the specific firearm category being assessed. Once the regulatory minimum is established, it must be applied to the total number of participants to determine the absolute minimum total ammunition required for the course. For instance, if the regulation mandates a minimum of 50 rounds per participant for a pistol proficiency exam, and there are 20 participants, the minimum total ammunition required is /50 text rounds / participant times 20 text participant equals 1000 text rounds /. This approach ensures strict adherence to legal requirements, safeguarding the integrity of the training and the validity of the participants' exam results. An incorrect approach would be to simply use a round number that seems sufficient without consulting the specific legal minimums. For example, assuming 75 rounds per participant is adequate without verifying if the legal minimum is higher. This fails to meet the regulatory standard and could lead to insufficient ammunition for the participants to demonstrate proficiency, thus failing the exam requirements. Another incorrect approach would be to calculate the ammunition based on a previous course's needs, or a general guideline not tied to the specific legal mandate for the current course and firearm type. This ignores the precise requirements of the current training scenario and the governing legislation. Finally, an approach that rounds down the calculated minimum ammunition to the nearest convenient quantity, even if slightly below the legally mandated total, would also be incorrect. This demonstrates a lack of diligence in applying the law and could result in non-compliance. The professional reasoning framework for such situations involves a systematic process. First, identify the specific legal and regulatory requirements applicable to the situation, in this case, Czech firearms training regulations. Second, extract the precise numerical data or formulas provided by these regulations. Third, perform the necessary calculations accurately, ensuring all variables are correctly identified and applied. Fourth, cross-reference the calculated result with the regulatory minimum to confirm compliance. Finally, document the calculation and the basis for it to provide a clear audit trail. Question 11. The audit findings indicate that a recent gun proficiency exam, Zkouška odborné způsobilosti, in the Czech Republic may not have fully addressed all potential safety risks associated with a candidate's firearm handling. Considering the syllabus and the paramount importance of public safety, which of the following approaches to assessing candidate proficiency would best mitigate these risks and ensure compliance with Czech regulations? Option A. Implementing a structured risk assessment framework that systematically identifies, evaluates, and documents potential hazards related to each component of the exam syllabus, including theoretical knowledge and practical application, and outlines necessary mitigation measures. Option B. Focusing primarily on the candidate's accuracy in hitting targets during the practical shooting portion of the exam, assuming that good marksmanship implies overall safe handling. Option C. Relying on the candidate's self-reported understanding of firearm safety and past experience, with minimal direct observation of their practical skills. Option D. Expediting the examination process by prioritizing speed and efficiency, potentially by shortening certain assessment modules or relying on general impressions rather than detailed evaluation. The correct answer is A. Implementing a structured risk assessment framework that systematically identifies, evaluates, and documents potential hazards related to each component of the exam syllabus, including theoretical knowledge and practical application, and outlines necessary mitigation measures. Explanation. The audit findings indicate a potential lapse in the rigorous application of risk assessment principles during the preparation for the Czech Republic's gun proficiency exam, Zkouška odborné způsobilosti. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the examiner to balance the need for thoroughness in assessing a candidate's proficiency with the potential for subjective bias or overlooking critical safety aspects. The core of the challenge lies in ensuring that the assessment process is objective, comprehensive, and directly aligned with the legal requirements for safe firearm handling and use as stipulated by Czech law. The best professional practice involves a systematic and documented risk assessment that identifies potential hazards associated with the candidate's demonstrated skills and knowledge, and then evaluates the likelihood and severity of those hazards occurring. This approach ensures that all aspects of the examination are scrutinized for safety implications, from the candidate's understanding of firearm mechanics and ammunition types to their practical handling and firing techniques. Specifically, this would involve creating a checklist or framework that systematically addresses each element of the syllabus, identifying areas where a candidate's performance could pose a risk to themselves or others, and documenting the mitigation strategies or further assessment required. This aligns with the overarching principle of the gun proficiency exam, which is to ensure that only individuals who can safely and responsibly handle firearms are certified, thereby upholding public safety and the integrity of the licensing process as mandated by relevant Czech legislation concerning firearms and ammunition. An approach that focuses solely on the candidate's ability to hit a target, without a comprehensive evaluation of their understanding of safety protocols and firearm manipulation, represents a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This overlooks the fundamental purpose of the exam, which is not merely marksmanship but safe and responsible ownership and use. Another unacceptable approach would be to rely on informal observations or past experiences with the candidate without a structured assessment. This introduces subjectivity and can lead to inconsistent evaluation, failing to meet the objective standards required by the examination regulations. Furthermore, an approach that prioritizes speed and efficiency over thoroughness, potentially skipping certain assessment modules, or not adequately probing areas of weakness, directly contravenes the legal obligation to ensure a high standard of proficiency and safety. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to the established syllabus and legal requirements. This involves understanding the specific competencies being tested, identifying potential risks associated with each competency, and developing a standardized method for assessing those risks. Regular review and updating of assessment methodologies based on audit findings and evolving best practices are crucial to maintaining the integrity and effectiveness of the examination process. Question 12. The audit findings indicate that during the recent firearms proficiency examination in the Czech Republic, the examination committee primarily relied on the standard safety mechanisms of the firearms provided and the general understanding of safe handling practices among participants, without conducting a specific, documented risk assessment for the particular training session and venue. Which of the following represents the most appropriate professional response to address this finding? Option A. Implement a mandatory pre-examination risk assessment protocol for all future proficiency tests, detailing potential hazards specific to the venue, equipment, and participant group, and outlining corresponding mitigation strategies to be reviewed and approved by the lead examiner. Option B. Delegate the responsibility of identifying and mitigating risks to individual participants, assuming they possess sufficient knowledge from prior experience to ensure their own safety and that of others during the examination. Option C. Conduct a post-examination review of any incidents that may have occurred, and if none are reported, consider the previous approach to risk assessment as adequate for future examinations. Option D. Issue a general reminder to all instructors and participants about the importance of firearm safety and the inherent safety features of the weapons, emphasizing that this should suffice for ensuring a safe examination environment. The correct answer is A. Implement a mandatory pre-examination risk assessment protocol for all future proficiency tests, detailing potential hazards specific to the venue, equipment, and participant group, and outlining corresponding mitigation strategies to be reviewed and approved by the lead examiner. Explanation. The audit findings indicate a potential lapse in the rigorous application of risk assessment principles during the recent firearms proficiency training and evaluation process in the Czech Republic. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the need for thorough risk identification and mitigation with the practicalities of administering a standardized examination. A failure to adequately assess risks can lead to compromised safety, ineffective training, and potential legal repercussions under Czech firearms legislation, specifically the Act on Firearms and Ammunition, Zákon o zbraních a střelivu. The best approach involves a proactive and systematic identification of potential hazards associated with firearms handling and the training environment, followed by the implementation of specific control measures tailored to mitigate these identified risks. This includes, but is not limited to, ensuring proper supervision by certified instructors, verifying the mechanical integrity of all firearms used, establishing clear safety zones, and confirming that participants have undergone appropriate preliminary safety briefings. This aligns with the spirit of the Zkouška odborné způsobilosti, which mandates a high standard of safety and competence. An approach that relies solely on the inherent safety features of modern firearms without a specific risk assessment for the training context is professionally unacceptable. It fails to account for human error, environmental factors, or the specific skill levels of the participants, thereby violating the principle of due diligence required by Czech law. Similarly, an approach that prioritizes speed of examination over thorough safety checks, assuming all participants are inherently safe, demonstrates a disregard for the potential for accidents and contravenes the safety mandates of the proficiency exam. Finally, an approach that delegates risk assessment entirely to the participants without direct oversight and verification by the examining body is also unacceptable, as it shifts responsibility away from the institution responsible for ensuring safe and competent firearm handling. Professionals should employ a structured risk management framework. This involves initial hazard identification, assessing the likelihood and severity of potential harm, developing and implementing control measures, and regularly reviewing the effectiveness of these measures. For the Zkouška odborné způsobilosti, this means a pre-examination risk assessment of the training venue, equipment, and participant group, with documented mitigation strategies. Question 13. The audit findings indicate a potential gap in the applicant's understanding of proactive risk management concerning firearm storage, considering the requirements for the Zkouška odborné způsobilosti in the Czech Republic. Which of the following best demonstrates a comprehensive approach to assessing and mitigating risks associated with firearm possession? Option A. A general statement confirming adherence to legal storage requirements, such as using a locked cabinet without further elaboration on specific risks or personal circumstances. Option B. A proposal for highly elaborate and expensive security systems that go beyond standard legal requirements without a clear link to specific elevated risks. Option C, a detailed assessment of potential risks, including unauthorized access by minors or other individuals, theft, and accidental discharge, with proposed specific and proportionate mitigation measures tailored to the applicant's circumstances, such as a certified safe and secure ammunition storage. Option D, an assertion that risks are minimal due to the applicant's isolated living situation and the perceived trustworthiness of household members. The correct answer is C, a detailed assessment of potential risks, including unauthorized access by minors or other individuals, theft, and accidental discharge, with proposed specific and proportionate mitigation measures tailored to the applicant's circumstances, such as a certified safe and secure ammunition storage. Explanation: the audit findings indicate a potential lapse in the risk assessment process related to firearm storage, which is a critical component of ensuring responsible gun ownership and public safety under Czech Republic law. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the applicant to demonstrate a nuanced understanding of risk identification, evaluation, and mitigation, not just rote memorization of storage regulations. The challenge lies in applying theoretical knowledge to a practical, albeit hypothetical, situation where potential risks need to be proactively addressed. The best approach involves a comprehensive assessment of potential risks associated with firearm storage, considering both environmental factors and the applicant's personal circumstances. This includes identifying vulnerabilities such as unauthorized access by minors or individuals not legally permitted to handle firearms, as well as risks of theft or accidental discharge. The applicant should then propose specific, proportionate mitigation measures tailored to these identified risks, such as secure storage in a certified safe, separate storage of ammunition, and ensuring all household members are aware of safe handling practices. This aligns with the spirit of the Zkouška odborné způsobilosti, which aims to ensure individuals possess the knowledge and judgment to safely possess firearms, thereby upholding the public interest and preventing misuse or accidents as stipulated by relevant Czech legislation concerning firearms and their storage. An incorrect approach would be to focus solely on meeting the minimum legal requirements for storage without considering the specific context or potential for heightened risk. For instance, simply stating that a locked cabinet will be used, without detailing its security features or considering the presence of children in the household, overlooks a crucial aspect of risk assessment. This fails to demonstrate proactive risk management and could leave vulnerabilities unaddressed, potentially contravening the underlying principles of responsible gun ownership mandated by Czech law. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss potential risks as unlikely or irrelevant without a thorough evaluation, assuming that no one else in the household would ever attempt to access the firearm, or that the risk of theft is negligible in a particular location, represents a failure to conduct a diligent risk assessment. Such assumptions can lead to inadequate safety measures and are contrary to the preventative intent of the Proficiency exam. A further incorrect approach is to propose mitigation measures that are disproportionate or impractical, such as excessive security measures that hinder legitimate access or are financially unfeasible. While thoroughness is important, the proposed solutions must be reasonable and aligned with the actual level of risk identified. Professionals should employ a systematic decision-making process for risk assessment. This involves 1. Identifying potential hazards and risks related to firearm possession and storage. 2. Evaluating the likelihood and severity of each identified risk. 3. Determining appropriate control measures to eliminate or reduce risks to an acceptable level. 4. Implementing and regularly reviewing the effectiveness of these control measures. This structured approach ensures that all relevant factors are considered and that the resulting safety protocols are robust and effective. Question 14. The audit findings indicate that the current system for ensuring ongoing firearm proficiency among licensed individuals in the Czech Republic relies heavily on self-reporting and responses to specific complaints, rather than a structured, proactive assessment. Considering the principles of public safety and the responsibilities outlined in the Czech Firearms and Ammunition Act, which of the following approaches to risk assessment for firearm proficiency is most aligned with regulatory expectations? Option A. Increase the penalties for any reported instance of unsafe firearm handling, thereby creating a stronger deterrent effect and indirectly encouraging continued proficiency. Option B. Shift the primary responsibility for monitoring and verifying ongoing proficiency entirely to the individual license holder, requiring them to maintain personal records of practice. Option C. Conduct random, unannounced proficiency checks on a small percentage of license holders annually, without a clear methodology for selecting individuals or determining the scope of the check. Option D. Implement a tiered system for periodic proficiency reevaluation, with frequency determined by factors such as license holder age, firearm category, and any history of relevant administrative infringements, supported by a clear protocol for notification and reassessment. The correct answer is D. Implement a tiered system for periodic proficiency reevaluation, with frequency determined by factors such as license holder age, firearm category, and any history of relevant administrative infringements, supported by a clear protocol for notification and reassessment. Explanation. The audit findings indicate a potential lapse in the risk assessment process for firearm ownership in the Czech Republic, specifically concerning the ongoing proficiency of license holders. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the state's interest in public safety with the rights of licensed firearm owners. A thorough risk assessment must proactively identify individuals who may no longer meet the proficiency standards, rather than relying solely on reactive measures after an incident. The core of the challenge lies in developing a system that is both effective in identifying risks and fair to license holders, adhering strictly to the Czech Firearms and Ammunition Act, Zákon o zbraních a střelivu. The best approach involves a proactive, data-driven risk assessment methodology. This entails establishing clear criteria for periodic reevaluation of proficiency, potentially triggered by factors such as the age of the license holder, the type of firearm owned, or a history of minor infractions. The Czech legal framework emphasizes the ongoing responsibility of the license holder to maintain proficiency and the obligation of the authorities to ensure this. A system that systematically monitors and assesses proficiency, even in the absence of specific incidents, aligns with the preventative spirit of the legislation. This approach ensures that potential risks are identified and addressed before they manifest as safety concerns, thereby upholding public safety while respecting the rights of law-abiding citizens. An incorrect approach would be to solely rely on reported incidents or complaints to trigger a proficiency review. This reactive stance fails to meet the proactive obligations implied by the need to ensure ongoing competence. The law expects a more systematic approach to public safety than waiting for problems to arise. Another incorrect approach would be to implement arbitrary or overly burdensome retesting requirements that are not based on a reasoned risk assessment. Such measures could be seen as punitive and disproportionate, potentially infringing on the rights of license holders without a clear justification rooted in demonstrable risk. Furthermore, an approach that delegates the responsibility of assessing ongoing proficiency entirely to the individual license holder, without any oversight or structured evaluation mechanism, would be a significant failure to uphold the state's duty of care. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes a systematic, evidence-based approach to risk assessment. This involves understanding the specific legal requirements for firearm ownership and proficiency in the Czech Republic, identifying potential risk factors, and developing proportionate mitigation strategies. The process should be transparent, fair, and subject to regular review and improvement. Question 15. Quality control measures reveal that during the practical component of the Zkouška odborné způsobilosti examination of professional competence, in the Czech Republic, a candidate exhibits significant hand tremors and shallow breathing, indicating pronounced nervousness as they prepare to handle a firearm. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the examiner? Option A. Immediately terminate the practical exercise and disqualify the candidate due to their visible distress. Option B. Pause the practical exercise, calmly acknowledge the candidate's apparent nervousness, and offer a brief moment for them to compose themselves before proceeding. Option C. Continue with the practical exercise as planned, assuming the candidate will manage their nervousness and demonstrate proficiency. Option D. Provide extensive verbal coaching and reassurance to the candidate throughout the remainder of the practical exercise to help them overcome their nervousness. The correct answer is B. Pause the practical exercise, calmly acknowledge the candidate's apparent nervousness, and offer a brief moment for them to compose themselves before proceeding. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the firearms instructor to balance the immediate need to assess a candidate's proficiency with the overarching responsibility to ensure public safety and uphold the integrity of the Czech Republic's firearms licensing process. The candidate's nervousness, while understandable, could potentially manifest in unsafe handling, creating a critical risk that must be managed without compromising the fairness of the assessment. The instructor must make a swift, informed judgment call that adheres strictly to the Zkouška odborné způsobilosti, examination of professional competence, regulations. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves immediately pausing the practical exercise and addressing the candidate's state of mind in a controlled manner. This approach is correct because it prioritizes safety above all else, a fundamental tenet of firearms training and licensing in the Czech Republic. Regulations governing the Zkouška odborné způsobilosti emphasize not only technical skill, but also the candidate's mental preparedness and ability to handle a firearm safely under pressure. By pausing, the instructor can ascertain the cause of the nervousness, offer brief reassurance or a moment to compose oneself, and then resume the exercise, ensuring the candidate is in a fit state to demonstrate proficiency safely. This aligns with the principle that an unsafe candidate cannot demonstrate genuine proficiency. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to proceed with the practical exercise despite the clear signs of significant nervousness. This fails to acknowledge the inherent risks associated with a nervous individual handling a firearm. The Zkouška odborné způsobilosti regulations implicitly require that the candidate be in a stable mental state to demonstrate safe handling. Ignoring the nervousness could lead to an accident, violating the instructor's duty of care and the spirit of the examination. Another incorrect approach is to immediately disqualify the candidate without attempting to understand or mitigate the nervousness. While safety is paramount, the examination is designed to assess proficiency, which includes the ability to manage stress. A brief, controlled pause to allow the candidate to regain composure is a reasonable step before resorting to disqualification. This approach is overly punitive and does not allow for the assessment of the candidate's potential to overcome minor performance anxieties. Further incorrect approach is to offer extensive coaching or emotional support during the practical exercise. While empathy is important, the Zkouška odborné způsobilosti is an objective assessment. Providing significant assistance beyond a brief moment to compose oneself blurs the line between instruction and examination, potentially compromising the validity and fairness of the assessment for other candidates and the overall integrity of the licensing process. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this role must employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety, adheres to regulatory requirements, and maintains assessment integrity. This involves 1. Immediate threat assessment, recognizing and evaluating potential risks. 2. Regulatory compliance, understanding and applying the specific requirements of the Zkouška odborné způsobilosti. 3. Proportionality of response, choosing an intervention that is appropriate to the situation, balancing safety with the assessment's objectives. 4. Documentation, recording all observations and actions taken. In this case, the immediate risk is the potential for unsafe handling due to nervousness. The regulatory framework demands safe demonstration of proficiency. Therefore, a controlled pause to address the nervousness, followed by a safe resumption of the exercise, represents the most proportionate and compliant response. Question 16. The audit findings indicate that an applicant for the Zkouška odborné způsobilosti in the Czech Republic has submitted a risk assessment for firearm storage that is considered inadequate. Which of the following approaches to risk assessment best demonstrates a comprehensive understanding of firearm safety and legal compliance for the exam? Option A. A detailed analysis of potential threats to the firearm's security, including unauthorized access, theft, and accidental discharge, with specific documented mitigation measures tailored to the chosen storage solution, such as a securely anchored gun safe with additional locking mechanisms. Option B. A general overview of the importance of firearm safety without specific details on the chosen storage method or potential risks. Option C. A brief statement confirming the use of a standard locked gun cabinet in a secure room within the applicant's residence, assuming this provides sufficient protection. Option D. A focus solely on the legal requirements for firearm registration, assuming that compliance with registration automatically ensures safe storage. The correct answer is A. A detailed analysis of potential threats to the firearm's security, including unauthorized access, theft, and accidental discharge, with specific documented mitigation measures tailored to the chosen storage solution, such as a securely anchored gun safe with additional locking mechanisms. Explanation. The audit findings indicate a potential lapse in the risk assessment process concerning the safe storage of firearms, critical component of the Czech Republic's Zkouška odborné způsobilosti, gun proficiency exam, framework. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the applicant to demonstrate not only theoretical knowledge, but also a practical understanding of safety protocols, which directly impacts public safety and legal compliance. A failure in risk assessment can lead to unsafe storage practices, increasing the likelihood of accidents, unauthorized access, or theft, all of which are serious contraventions of Czech firearms legislation. The best approach involves a comprehensive and documented assessment of all potential risks associated with the chosen firearm storage method. This includes identifying potential threats, e.g., unauthorized access by children, theft, accidental discharge, evaluating the likelihood and severity of each threat, and implementing specific, proportionate mitigation measures. For instance, this would involve detailing the type of safe used, its anchoring, use of trigger locks, and the rationale behind these choices, all aligned with the principles of responsible firearm ownership mandated by Czech law. This systematic approach ensures that all foreseeable risks are addressed proactively, demonstrating a thorough understanding of the responsibilities associated with firearm ownership as tested in the Zkouška odborné způsobilosti. An incorrect approach would be to provide a superficial or incomplete risk assessment. For example, simply stating that a locked cabinet is sufficient without detailing its specifications, anchoring, or considering other potential risks like access by minors or the possibility of the cabinet being compromised, fails to meet the standard of due diligence required. This demonstrates a lack of understanding of the multifaceted nature of firearm safety and a disregard for the detailed requirements of the proficiency exam. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on general assumptions about the security of the storage location without specific measures for the firearm itself. This overlooks the direct responsibility an applicant has for the safe containment of the weapon, irrespective of the general security of their residence. Such an approach is a direct contravention of the proactive safety measures expected under Czech firearms regulations. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that prioritizes thoroughness and adherence to regulatory requirements. This involves breaking down the risk assessment into distinct stages: identification of hazards, analysis of risks, evaluation of risks, and treatment of risks. Each stage must be documented and justified, ensuring that the final storage plan is robust, defensible, and fully compliant with the Zkouška odborné způsobilosti syllabus and relevant Czech laws. Question 17. The audit findings indicate that a recent applicant for a firearms license in the Czech Republic has proposed storing their firearms in a standard household safe that is bolted to the floor, claiming it provides adequate security. What is the most appropriate course of action to ensure compliance with Czech Republic's firearm proficiency and storage regulations? Option A. Verify that the proposed safe meets the specific security standards mandated by Czech law for the types and quantities of firearms the applicant intends to store, and assess its placement for accessibility to unauthorized persons. Option B. Approve the storage solution based on the fact that the safe is locked and bolted, assuming this meets the general intent of secure storage. Option C. Advise the applicant that any locked container is acceptable as long as it is not easily accessible to children. Option D. Accept the applicant's assurance that the household safe, being bolted to the floor, offers sufficient security for their firearms. The correct answer is A. Verify that the proposed safe meets the specific security standards mandated by Czech law for the types and quantities of firearms the applicant intends to store, and assess its placement for accessibility to unauthorized persons. Explanation. The audit findings indicate a potential lapse in the risk assessment process related to firearm storage, which is a critical component of ensuring responsible gun ownership and public safety under Czech Republic law. The professional challenge lies in accurately identifying and mitigating risks associated with firearm security, balancing the rights of licensed owners with the imperative to prevent unauthorized access and misuse. A thorough risk assessment requires a systematic evaluation of potential threats and vulnerabilities, followed by the implementation of appropriate preventative measures. The best approach involves a comprehensive review of the applicant's proposed storage solutions against the specific requirements outlined in the Czech Firearms Act, Zkouška and related implementing decrees. This includes verifying that the chosen safe or cabinet meets the mandated security standards for the types and quantities of firearms intended for storage, and that the location of storage is secure and inaccessible to unauthorized individuals. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the legal obligations for safe storage, which are designed to minimize the risk of theft or accidental discharge, thereby upholding public safety and fulfilling the applicant's responsibility under the law. An incorrect approach would be to rely solely on the applicant's verbal assurance of security without independent verification. This fails to meet the due diligence required by the Firearms Act, which mandates demonstrable compliance with storage regulations. Another incorrect approach is to accept a storage solution that meets only minimal security standards, without considering the specific risks posed by the types of firearms owned or the applicant's living environment. This overlooks the principle of proportionality in risk management, where the security measures should be commensurate with the potential dangers. Finally, assuming that any locked container is sufficient for firearm storage is a significant failure, as Czech law specifies particular security features and resistance levels for firearm safes and cabinets, which are crucial for preventing unauthorized access. Professionals should adopt a structured decision-making process that begins with understanding the specific legal requirements for firearm storage in the Czech Republic. This involves consulting the relevant sections of the Firearms Act and its implementing regulations. The next step is to systematically assess the applicant's proposed storage plan against these requirements, looking for concrete evidence of compliance. If any aspect of the plan appears inadequate or ambiguous, further inquiry and verification are necessary before approving the application. This methodical approach ensures that all legal obligations are met and that the highest standards of public safety are maintained. Question 18. The performance metrics show a recent increase in minor procedural deviations during firearms proficiency testing in the Czech Republic. As an assessor, how should you approach these incidents to ensure compliance with the Zkouška and maintain public safety? Option A. Conduct a detailed, individualized risk assessment for each deviation, considering its nature, the applicant's response, and contributing factors. Determine overall suitability and proficiency. Option B. Prioritize the applicant's stated intent and previous clean record over their performance during the proficiency test when evaluating suitability. Option C. Immediately disqualify any applicant who commits any procedural deviation, regardless of its severity or context, to uphold the strictest safety standards. Option D. Apply a generalized assumption that all procedural deviations indicate a fundamental lack of proficiency and require retraining. The correct answer is A. Conduct a detailed, individualized risk assessment for each deviation, considering its nature, the applicant's response, and contributing factors to determine overall suitability and proficiency. Explanation. The performance metrics show a concerning trend in the number of reported incidents involving firearms during proficiency testing in the Czech Republic. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a nuanced understanding of the Czech Firearms Act, Zkouška, and its implementing regulations, specifically concerning the assessment of an applicant's suitability and proficiency. The challenge lies in distinguishing between minor procedural errors that can be corrected and fundamental deficiencies that indicate a lack of the required expertise or responsible attitude towards firearms, which are critical for public safety. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the assessment process is fair, accurate, and upholds the stringent standards set by Czech law for firearm ownership. The best approach involves a thorough, individualized risk assessment of each incident. This means meticulously reviewing the specific circumstances of each reported firearm handling issue during the proficiency test. The assessor must consider the nature of the deviation from proper procedure, the applicant's response to the error, and any contributing factors. This approach is correct because it aligns directly with the principles of the Czech Firearms Act, which mandates that an applicant must demonstrate not only technical proficiency, but also a responsible attitude towards firearms. A detailed, case-by-case evaluation allows for a determination of whether the applicant's actions indicate a genuine risk to public safety or a correctable lapse in judgment. This aligns with the spirit of the law, which aims to prevent firearms from falling into the hands of individuals who pose a threat. An approach that immediately disqualifies any applicant who commits any procedural error, regardless of its severity or context, is professionally unacceptable. It fails to acknowledge that even experienced individuals can make minor mistakes under pressure. Such an approach would be overly punitive and not reflective of the nuanced assessment required by Czech law, which allows for discretion based on the gravity of the infraction. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to focus solely on the applicant's stated intent or their previous clean record, without a thorough examination of the actual performance during the test. While intent and past behavior are factors, the proficiency exam is specifically designed to assess current capabilities and adherence to safety protocols. Ignoring demonstrated performance during the test would undermine the purpose of the examination and potentially overlook critical safety concerns. Finally, an approach that relies on a generalized assumption that all errors are indicative of a lack of proficiency, without detailed investigation, is also flawed. This bypasses the legal requirement to assess individual suitability and could lead to unfair outcomes. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. First, clearly identify the specific regulation or standard that was potentially violated. Second, gather all relevant facts and evidence pertaining to the incident. Third, analyze these facts against the established standards, considering the severity, intent, and context of the action. Fourth, consult relevant legal provisions and guidance from the Czech Ministry of the Interior or other designated authorities. Finally, make a reasoned decision based on this comprehensive analysis, ensuring it is justifiable and defensible under Czech firearms law. Question 19. Stakeholder feedback indicates a need to assess practical risk mitigation strategies for firearm owners in the Czech Republic. An applicant for the Zkouška odborné způsobilosti is preparing to transport a legally owned firearm and ammunition from their residence to a designated shooting range. Considering the regulatory framework governing firearm ownership and use in the Czech Republic, which of the following approaches best demonstrates an understanding of risk assessment and responsible firearm management? Option A. Placing the unloaded firearm and ammunition in a locked gun case, which is then placed on the passenger seat of the vehicle, readily accessible in case of an emergency. Option B. Securely storing the unloaded firearm and ammunition in separate locked containers within the trunk of the vehicle, ensuring the firearm is disassembled if legally permissible and the ammunition is stored in its original packaging. Option C. Carrying the firearm unloaded and secured in a locked case in the trunk, but not taking specific precautions to ensure the ammunition is also secured separately, assuming it will remain within the vehicle. Option D. Transporting the firearm unloaded in a locked case in the trunk, but leaving the ammunition in the glove compartment for easy access during the journey. The correct answer is B. Securely storing the unloaded firearm and ammunition in separate locked containers within the trunk of the vehicle, ensuring the firearm is disassembled if legally permissible, and the ammunition is stored in its original packaging. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an applicant to demonstrate not only theoretical knowledge of firearm safety and handling, but also the practical ability to assess and mitigate risks in a real-world context, as mandated by the Czech Republic's Zkouška odborné způsobilosti, Exam of Professional Competence, regulations. The core challenge lies in translating abstract knowledge into concrete, safe actions, particularly when faced with potential hazards. Careful judgment is required to prioritize safety and adherence to legal requirements over expediency or personal convenience. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a systematic, risk-based approach to firearm handling and storage. This means proactively identifying potential hazards associated with the firearm, its ammunition, and the environment in which it is being handled or stored. It requires implementing appropriate control measures to mitigate these identified risks, such as secure storage, safe handling procedures, and awareness of legal obligations regarding transport and use. This approach aligns directly with the spirit and letter of the Czech Zkouška odborné způsobilosti, which emphasizes responsible ownership and the prevention of accidents and misuse. The regulations implicitly demand a proactive stance on safety, rather than a reactive one. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves assuming that simply possessing a firearm and ammunition in a locked container is sufficient, without considering the specific risks posed by the environment or the potential for unauthorized access. This overlooks the detailed requirements for safe storage and transport stipulated by Czech law, which often go beyond mere containment to include considerations of accessibility and security against theft or misuse. Another unacceptable approach is to prioritize convenience over safety, such as leaving a firearm unloaded but accessible in a vehicle while making a brief stop. This demonstrates a failure to understand the inherent risks of firearms and the legal obligations to secure them at all times, even when seemingly under direct supervision. Czech regulations are stringent on preventing any possibility of unauthorized access or accidental discharge. Finally, an approach that focuses solely on the legal requirements for documentation without adequately addressing the physical safety and security of the firearm and ammunition is also flawed. While documentation is crucial, the primary objective of the Zkouška odborné způsobilosti is to ensure the applicant can safely manage a firearm, which includes robust physical security measures. Professional reasoning. Professionals preparing for or undergoing the Zkouška odborné způsobilosti in the Czech Republic should adopt a comprehensive risk management framework. This involves 1. Hazard identification, systematically identifying all potential dangers related to the firearm, ammunition, and the context of its use or storage. 2. Risk assessment, evaluating the likelihood and severity of harm arising from these hazards. 3. Control measures, implementing appropriate safeguards to eliminate or reduce risks to an acceptable level in strict accordance with Czech firearms legislation. 4. Review and monitoring, regularly reviewing the effectiveness of control measures and adapting them as necessary. This proactive and thorough process ensures compliance with legal mandates and upholds the highest standards of firearm safety. Question 20. Regulatory review indicates that to qualify for the Zkouška odborné způsobilosti in the Czech Republic, applicants must demonstrate proficiency through specific shooting exercises. If the examination protocol mandates 2 distinct shooting exercises, Exercise Alpha, requiring 15 shots per session to be completed twice, and Exercise Beta, requiring 10 shots per session to be completed 3 times. What is the minimum total number of rounds of ammunition an applicant must expend to meet the proficiency requirements? Option A, 60 rounds. Option B, 50 rounds. Option C, 75 rounds. Option D, 45 rounds. The correct answer is A, 60 rounds. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge by requiring the applicant to not only understand the theoretical aspects of firearm safety and handling, but also to apply them in a practical, quantifiable manner. The challenge lies in accurately calculating the required ammunition expenditure based on specific training parameters and understanding the implications of deviations from these parameters under Czech Republic law concerning the Zkouška odborné způsobilosti. Miscalculation could lead to an incomplete or invalid training record, potentially jeopardizing the applicant's qualification. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a precise calculation of the minimum ammunition required for the mandatory shooting exercises as stipulated by the relevant regulations for the Czech Republic's Zkouška odborné způsobilosti. This approach directly adheres to the legal requirements for demonstrating proficiency. Specifically, it requires multiplying the number of shots per exercise by the number of exercises and summing these totals. For instance, if exercise A requires 10 shots and is performed twice, and exercise B requires 5 shots and is performed 3 times, the calculation would be /10 text shots / exercise times 2 text exercises plus 5 text shots / exercise times 3 text exercises equals 20 plus 15 equals 35 shots. This method ensures that the applicant meets the minimum legal standard for ammunition expenditure, which is a prerequisite for passing the examination. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves estimating the ammunition needed based on a general understanding of shooting practice, without consulting the specific regulatory requirements for the Zkouška odborné způsobilosti. This fails to meet the legal obligation to adhere to prescribed standards and could result in insufficient ammunition being used, rendering the training invalid. Another incorrect approach is to calculate the ammunition based solely on the number of targets engaged, ignoring the specified number of shots per target or per exercise as defined by the examination syllabus. This overlooks the granular requirements of the proficiency test and could lead to a shortfall in the required shooting practice. A further incorrect approach is to calculate the ammunition based on a desired level of personal comfort or perceived effectiveness rather than the legally mandated minimum. This prioritizes subjective experience over objective compliance with the Zkouška odborné způsobilosti regulations, which is a failure to meet the legal standard. Professional reasoning. Professionals must adopt a systematic approach to regulatory compliance. This involves identifying the specific legal and regulatory requirements for the Zkouška odborné způsobilosti, breaking down complex tasks into quantifiable components, and performing precise calculations based on these requirements. When faced with ambiguity, seeking clarification from official sources or regulatory bodies is paramount. The decision-making process should prioritize adherence to the law and the established standards of the examination.